Welcome to the 53rd edition of Stump the Pastor. Our question today comes from Gary in Minnesota. And he says, "My best one yet. We know Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus. Had it not been for his betrayal, would Jesus have been arrested and subsequently sacrificed because of this? Or was this part of the prophecy of the Messianic age? Therefore, is Judas considered an integral part of Christianity and considered a foe of Jesus, or the reason for our salvation?" Oh my, Gary. Definitely your most complex yet as well. Now, for those of you that don't know, Gary and Tammy were Bill and my neighbors in Minneapolis for about 10 years. As you can tell by his question, Gary has an inquisitive mind. But let's see if we can make any sense of the connections Gary has made. Now, most of us are probably familiar with the Jesus stories of the gospel and know that Judas is an important part of that story. His actions as the betrayer of Jesus are an important part of the drama that allows Jesus to be taken by the Roman soldiers, imprisoned, and ultimately crucified. The actions of Judas highlight the primary tension in the Passion narratives because righteous provocateur and greedy opportunist are the poles between which he seems to operate. We can hypothesize that if Judas was part of the 12, the challenges Jesus was making to Roman authority and to abusive religious practices would still have produced the same outcome, even if Jesus hadn't been part of the 12. Whenever powerful people or institutions are challenged, it is never pretty for the challenger. So Gary's question is, does this then mean Judas is the reason for our salvation? I don't think so, but let me explain why. In the story, as we all know, Judas is motivated by envy and opportunity. Now keep in mind that everything we have in the gospel stories is told from the point of the view of the hero, that is Jesus. So we don't have a whole lot of insight into Judas's state of mind. Judas in some ways is simply the antagonist who makes the protagonist look good. It is great storytelling, but doesn't end up well for the antagonist. What struck me about the question that Gary asked is the phrase, reason for our salvation. You see, people get salvation wrong lots. The word salvation in the Bible means to be made whole. Salvation is too often been defined by conservative Christianity as being snatched from the grip of evil. So depending on how we understand our salvation gives us insight into this question. The example of Jesus as someone who challenged the oppression of Roman cruelty, the abuse of religious practice, and an example of what it means to live by grace is the guide I use to seek wholeness, that is, salvation. That would be true even if Jesus lived to a ripe old age and died in his sleep. Jesus didn't have to die on a cross for his vision of the world to become reality. Unfortunately, his vision of who God is and how we live with integrity and grace together was so threatening to the forces that profited from oppression that they had to find a way to silence his example. Judas was handy and he was motivated. You know, I'm so grateful for your question, Gary, because religious terminology has become so muddled that it helps us to have a chance to parse out what our terms mean. And when we do this, we get a clearer vision for why Jesus' vision for his world was so threatening to those who were invested in the status quo, and why his example still calls those of us who are disciples to continue to challenge the brokenness of our current world. Also, we don't have to look far to see examples that challenging oppressive systems and abusive leaders is still a dangerous endeavor. It is, however, the way we live our salvation. That is our wholeness, even today. So Judas is not the reason for our salvation, but he was certainly an important part of the story. Thanks for your question, Gary. See you next time on Stump the Pastor. I can always count on you, Gary, to come up with some great questions. Thank you for sending it to me. I know the rest of you have some great questions as well. My email address is on the bottom of your screen. Send them to me on Stump the Pastor.